Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Last few years, something we've been seeing a lot more of, especially with newer clients, is doctors coming to us with more than one practice. They have a second, third, or possibly more locations. And with current industry trends, this makes sense. As a matter of fact, adding additional locations is something that we encourage our clients to do here at MGE if it's something that fits their goals and life plan. Now, you might wonder, well, why does this make sense? Well, without rehashing the trends responsible for this, which I went into in great detail in episode 141, which was the state of the dental industry in 2024, here are a few basic facts. There's currently 203,000, and I'm rounding these numbers off, so it's not 203,782, but whatever. So I'm just going to keep it general here. There's currently 203,000 dentists practicing in the United States. Almost 35% of these doctors, close to 71,000, are over 55. And of that, 16% of these 203,000 doctors are over 65. Now, I'm not, giving somebody a hard time because they're 55 or over. I'm not a spring chicken myself. But the point being is, if you were to talk to someone like me and you asked, how much longer do I plan on working? It's not 30 to 35 years. If I talk to a doctor who's 60 years old, they're not planning on practicing till they're 90. The point is that if they're 55 or over, the amount of time that they plan to stay active chairside or practicing dentistry is not going to be 30 years. It's going to be less than a doctor who is 29. All right. So now, if you look at the younger doctors in the United States, practice ownership is no longer a young person's game. There's 149,000 doctors that own dental practices of their 203,000 in the United States. Now, some of these might be in partnerships or whatever, but less than 6% of these doctors, meaning 9,000 of the doctors, are 35 and under. 6% of the practice owners are 35 and under. So of these 149,000 practice owners, close to 62,000 or 43% are owned by doctors 55 and over. So you have a large percentage of the practice or the practicing dentist population who's 55 and over, and they own the majority of the dental practices, 43%. So now moving forward, if you look at where this is going to go over the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to end up with a lot of these practices turning over, meaning they need to sell them either to a corporation or to another doctor, or close them or sell the charts or whatever. It really depends on the office. But the point being is there's going to be a lot of practices coming for sale, and younger doctors are not buying practices like they used to. That's drastically changed over the last 20 years. And you might again think that, well, all these practices that are going to be for sale are going to be bought up by corporate dentistry. Well, that's not true. For the most part, DSO targets need to be doing at least $1.5 million a year, in many cases more. Now, how do I know this? Because we have a lot of clients who do $4, $5, $6, $10 million a year. And two things happen. Number one, they get approached by DSOs all the time. And number two, even if they didn't want to sell to a DSO at some point, there's very few private practitioners, even groups of private practitioners, that could come up with the kind of money that you'd need to come up with to buy an $8 million a year practice. All right. So not a lot of these practices that are going to be coming up for sale over the next 5, 10 years are going to be DSO targets. They're going to be, and when I say coming up, a lot have been coming up for sale. So they're being bought by other dentists. That's why you see a lot of doctors with second, third, fourth, or more locations. And with that in mind, with these newer clients who walk in with multiple practices, what else are we seeing? Well, we're seeing stress. So I want you to imagine for a second, if you're a doctor owner and you own one practice and you are stressed out, I want you to imagine for a second that you don't just own that office, you own 3. And all of the problems that you're having in your main office, you're probably having in the other 2 or some variation thereof. And why do we see these doctors walking in stressed out? Well, they jumped off into these other offices. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but they made some mistakes along the way. In many cases, making a lot of the mistakes that we advise, a current MGE client against when looking at adding an additional location. And of course, if someone comes in here with 3 offices and they've got problems because they made mistakes in the acquisition, we help them out of it, but it would have been a heck of a lot better to not have made that mistake. Am I saying that correctly? In the first place. And it's the 5 biggest mistakes when acquiring an additional location and how to avoid them that I want to talk to you about in this week's episode. My name is Jeff Bloomberg and I'm your host. And, like I said, I could talk about this for a long time, but with any subject, there are big issues that you want to be aware of, and then there's the small details and whatever. And that's what I plan on hitting on in this episode, the really big ones. And it's a lot of the same things we tell MGE clients. Now, I should say before I get into these that I'm going to use a little bit of terminology here. Nothing, it's just a little bit of code. When I'm referring, this assumes that you have a practice already. So let's say we're talking about a doctor owner, they have a practice, it's their office. We're going to call that office your starter office, the one you started with, your main office or office number 1. Okay, and if you're buying an additional location, we'll call that office number 2. So it's the main office or office 1. So what are these 5 no-nos? Let's have a look at them. Well, the first one, and the biggest one, something we hear a lot of, is someone buying a second office because the first office, the main one, isn't doing well. This is something I was talking to our vice president for expansion, Jeff Santoni. He says he hears that all the time. Well, why do you have 2 offices? Why do you have 3 offices? Well, the first one wasn't doing well, so, I thought I'd get another one. It's one of these things where it could make sense depending on how you're thinking with it, but it really doesn't make sense. And here's the basic reason why. If office number 1, your main office, isn't doing well, it's not because of an external factor. Get that one, let that one sink in for a second. Sure, external factors to your practice can have some degree of impact on your business. If I'm in a highly competitive area, or if I'm a doctor in a high rise with 60 other dentists, sure, that's not going to be as great as if I was by myself in that high rise. Sure, but that is not the reason why the practice isn't successful. It's very easy to blame the economy and insurance companies and the labor market and everything else on the lack of success or profitability in your practice, but that's never the actual reason. That is never, I can tell you that 1,000%, that is never the actual reason. The reason the practice is not going well is because of something that you are doing or you are not doing as the owner/executive. And it'll manifest in any number of different ways. You can't find good staff members. You don't sell very well, so the income is bad. Maybe you've joined a bunch of plans. Maybe you're just not great as an executive and you need to get some training. There could be any number of reasons why the practice isn't doing well. And this is why companies like MGE exists. And if, for that matter, if your practice isn't doing well or you feel like it should be doing better, I'll put a link on the episode webpage for a free practice consultation. It literally is free. You don't have to do anything. You can explain to us what's going on. We'll give you our assessment as to what you should be doing to do better, and you can go from there. Links on the episode webpage. But so I want you to imagine for a second that practice 1 isn't doing well due to actions you are or you are not taking. And obviously these actions that you are or are not taking that are causing the place to not do well, you're not aware of. If you're doing something intentionally to tank your practice, well, okay, what do you want to say? But in most cases, that isn't the case. I can't find good staff. The person's trying to find good staff. They just can't. It's not like they're doing what they think is right. It just turns out to not be right. You get my point. It's not like they're intentionally doing wrong. So if due to your action or inaction, your practice is not doing well and you're not aware of what it is that's making it not do well, you're going to take that same problem and bring it to office number 2. It will get perpetuated in office number 2. Just because you open a new location doesn't mean that all of that will magically solve. The reason you might think that is you might think, well, it's my location. Well, it's the patients in this area. People in this area don't care about their teeth, but over there they do. I've seen a lot of second offices open because, that neighborhood's great. People have a lot of money, which really doesn't necessarily translate into a lot of patients who want to do extensive work. You might think it does, but it doesn't necessarily translate that way. And so you're solving the wrong problem. The real problem is either actions you are taking or you are not taking that are making your practice not do well. So if you don't find out what those are and you get into office number 2, you're going to perpetuate those same actions. And now instead of one practice that's not doing well and isn't profitable, now you'll have 2. You've taken your problem and multiplied it, which I don't necessarily recommend. So what would be the rule here? Basically, it would be don't start or buy office number 2 unless office number 1 is doing well. You're not working 70 hours a week and the place is profitable. Well, how do you know if you're profitable? Well, here's a basic calculation I will give you without getting into all the specifics surrounding overhead. You, at minimum, should have at least 20% profit, paying you as if you were paying an associate. All right, I'll say that again. Your practice should be doing at least 20% profit, paying you as if you were paying an associate. Should be closer to 25, but we'll say at least 20%. So let's give you some basic math. Let's say the practice is collecting, this is just you in your office, maybe it's you and 1 or 2 hygienists, and you're collecting $100,000 a month, and you as the owner doctor are doing $70,000 of that. Well, if you were to pay an associate to do $70,000 a month, you'd have to pay that associate $21,000 at least, 30%, let's say. So you're doing $100,000, you're doing 70 of it, and if you were to pay yourself as an associate, I'm not saying you should, this is just for math purposes to check profitability, you'd have to pay yourself at least 30% or $21,000, which is 30% of the $70,000. So on top of that, we should have an additional 20% at least profit. So how would that roll out? We have a collection of $100,000. Subtract the $21,000 that you would pay an associate to do the work for you, or if you were paying yourself as an associate, leaves us with $79,000, and we should have at least 20% profit, which is $20,000 of that $100,000, which comes to $41,000. So our overhead should not be more than $58,000 a month, or 58%. That would be what I would consider to be at least a profitable practice. Now, one thing to keep in mind, let's say you're just very productive and you have a lot of debt service because, you bought a bunch of equipment or whatever. Debt service less the interest counts as profit. So if I'm paying a loan back and $7,000 a month is principal and $1,000 is interest, I would count that $7,000 as eventual profit because once that loan's paid off, it's going to be mine anyway. But that's what I'd want to see, at least 20% profit over and above paying the doctor. Because in some cases, even if you're collecting or producing rather 70,000 of that 100, you're not paying yourself 30% of that. But that to me, I know the math is a little confusing, but not that difficult. That to me would be a level of profitability where I'd go, okay, this practice is healthy. They're at least 20%, if not 25% after paying the doctor. This is a safe place to jump off into office number 2. And that same math would apply, by the way, to office number 2. If you have additional locations, they should be netting you at least 20 to 30%. Ideally, 25%-ish would be where you'd minimally want to live. All right. What's the second no-no here or mistake that we see people make is when they get a second location, they're putting themselves into the equation. In other words, they're buying this office with the concept that they are going to work there. So you're in office number 1, you're a full-time doctor owner, you're the primary producer in this practice, and you go, oh, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to buy office number 2. I can work there on Thursdays and Fridays. It's close to my house. I would never, ever, ever get a second location that way. I can't tell you how many times I've had people explain this scenario to me and watch everything just go really, really bad. Especially what I see a lot is, oh, I bought office number 2. It's close to my house. It's a beautiful area. The people people that live around that area make a lot of money. It should be a great practice. And now they're working 6 to 7 days a week, split between office number 1 and office number 2. The other thing they miss is they're now diluting office number 1, the main office, because they're having to work in office number 2. If you're going to buy a second location, that place should be able to survive without you there at all. It should be driven by an associate and an office manager with some oversight clinically and, of course, financially and managerially from you as the doctor owner, but it should not require your continuous physical presence to make the place go because your physical presence is already needed in office number 1, you see. So if you're buying it with the idea that you're going to go work in that other office, you're setting yourself up for some real problems. That's never, ever, ever a good idea. All right, mistake number 3 that we see is someone buys a practice and they inherit the staff and the associate that are there, but they don't really have a trained or productive team in place when they take over. They take over the associate that's there. It seems like everything's going to be okay. Maybe you've looked at some of the dentistry and you're not unhappy with it. That person's unstable and then they end up leaving 2 months later, and the office manager isn't exactly what you're looking for. And then you have a mess on your hands 3 months later when the staff start quitting. So here's what I would be looking for. If you want to have a satellite office, if this opportunity presents itself, you need 2 people at minimum in a certain condition, meaning you need an office manager and associate. So what would you be looking for in the office manager? If you're an MGE client, I would tell you that you need a trained office manager. This should be through the office manager training program, and that office manager needs to be able to sell and close. Now, the problem is, how are you going to know that the office manager can sell and close if you've never worked with the person before? You're not. So ideally, what would happen is this office manager might be one of your up-and-coming team members, maybe a junior executive in the main office, maybe somebody that you can train in the main office that you will eventually transfer to this new office. You know, we might call that person a junior office manager, or maybe the back office manager, or somebody who has that drive and determination to want that you can train, can close, and you've seen them close in your main office. Then that's somebody that you have complete confidence in placing into this new office so that they can run it. The same thing applies with an associate. Ideally, your associate would know how to sell because you're not going to be there selling. But at minimum, what you need with the associate is you need to know, A, they're stable, meaning they're not going to want to leave 3 months from now. B, that they have excellent clinical skill, which the only way you're going to know that is if you work with the person. And C, that they can at least have a good conversation with a patient. You know, I would love for them to be able to close, but we're talking bare minimums here. I have my trained office manager who can close. If my associate can carry on a good conversation with a patient and they're a good dentist, well, then at least they can explain procedures to patients that they're going to need, answer their questions, and the office manager can come in and close the case. Now, again, just like with the OM, how do I know if they're any good? They need to work with me. So what would be the ideal situation if you have a practice online that you might want to acquire over the next month to 2 months, maybe 3, you'd have somebody in your practice that you've already got on deck for something like this, maybe that you're training or that you can get into training. You bring in an associate into your main office that works with you for a bit so you can see that their dentistry is good and that they're going to work out, so that when the time comes where you close on office number 2, you just put them in there and they get to work. Of course, there's going to be all kinds of setup and checklists and all kinds of things to make sure everything's set the way that you want, and the software is the way you want, and the technology is the way you want it if you use Addit or Weave or Mango or this, all that kind of stuff, right? But at minimum, if you have a good OM there and you have a stable associate there, you can build with that, you know, and get more associates and assistants and everything else. And you'll probably inherit some staff if you're buying a practice that's already running. But those are sort of the bare minimums in scenes or situations that we've seen that have been successful. Now, I should kind of maybe backtrack for a second because I brought up that the idea is that you're not going to be the producer in office number 2. One thing I will mention is, let's take a specialized scenario here. Let's say you're in your main office and you already have maybe 1 or 2 associates, and you bring in another associate that you're going to put into office number 2, or maybe one of your current associates you're going to move into office number 2. And you have that office manager trainee that works under your current office manager who's going to be the manager of office number 2. And maybe you as the clinician are only doing the more extensive cases. Maybe you're doing the implants or the more involved implant cases, or the all-on X's or the FMRs, and the associates handle the more day-to-day dentistry. Well, there's nothing stopping you when you open office number 2, from doing those same procedures in office number 2 as well, because chances are you're not full-time doing FMRs and all on X cases in office number 1. So if it becomes that you have associates holding down the fort and doing your good, your regular old bread and butter dentistry in both practices, and you're doing the more involved cases, sure, at that point you might bounce between the 2 offices, or possibly a 3rd office when you open it and you're doing the higher end procedures. That's fine. But I wouldn't want you to get office number 2 with the idea that you're going to be the main guy or girl in that practice, because you already are that in office number 1. All right, so that's point number 3. which is how we staff this place, stable OM, stable doc. And again, I know I've talked about this earlier, but I can't reiterate this enough. The importance of having that doctor be stable and somebody you can trust and does a good job. I've just seen it with clients so many times where they got that second office. They're all excited. They're working in office 1 for 4 days a week. They open office 2 for 4 days a week. They have an associate in there. The associate fails for some reason because they didn't have enough working relationship with this associate to know that this person was going to be a problem. And now the owner doctor is split between the 2 offices, and they are open they have to actually reduce the hours in their main office to 3 days a week. And they're in office number 2, 3 days a week, and they're just stressed out of their brains. So important. Okay. Point number 4 has to do, as far as the biggest mistake we see, has to do with the acquisition of the second location. And there's a couple points on this. First one is I would not overpay for this second location. The whole dental pricing algorithm has gone completely cuckoo over the last probably 6 years with all of the DSOs entering the market. And because the algorithm, I've talked about this on the show before, the algorithm used to be 70% of last year's collections. It was like that when I first got into the industry in the early 90s. It held, and it still holds with most private transactions to this day. It might be a little more than 70 if it's, you got a cone beam. It'd be a little less if the equipment is old. I know that pricing in California as well as in Canada can be a little bit more, but it's not what you see some of these DSOs pay, which they're paying, they're paying 3 times last year's collections or something like this, right? And I won't get into all the ins and outs of that, but the whole valuation algorithm has messed up a bit. I personally think if you're getting a second location, you shouldn't be buying a practice where you have to compete with a DSO, which means, number one, you have to know how to scale a dental practice. You have to know how to build it, because if you don't know how to build it, you have to buy something that's already going, which is what corporate does. I would rather see you buy a smaller practice that's a great opportunity and build it up. We have clients do this all the time where they buy a practice that's doing 30,000. Now it does 100 or 200 or 300. That's not abnormal. That's not difficult to do. We train our clients to do it. It's actually very easy. So when you buy, don't overpay. I don't care if the broker tells you 5 other people are looking at it. You don't want to get, what's the word that, well, probably the best term would be FOMO, fear of missing out. Don't get FOMO when you're buying a dental practice. The deal will come to you. Buy something that actually works or fits. That's the first thing. Second thing is, when you're looking at the practice, I wouldn't be completely fixated on the price and ignore the potential of the practice. Maybe I'm paying 72%, not 172%. I'm paying 72%, a little bit more than I wanted to, but this place has a ton of potential. It has 5 ops and it's plumbed for 10. Okay, it's not 3 ops and there's no room for growth. And the area has a ton of potential. There aren't a lot of other dentists in this area. That has some potential. And sure, I'm paying an extra 2 or 3% for this office, but it's a good deal. And I think that I could end up making this thing work. That said, I wouldn't want to pay an extra 20 or 30%, because I just wouldn't. I'd rather start from scratch at that point, because the amount that equipment costs now compared to even 10 years ago, you can start a scratch practice for next to nothing. So I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't overpay, but I would focus on the potential when I'm looking at this place. If it's got 3 ops and no room for growth, I'm going to be very limited, unless I'm in Manhattan, because the space is at a premium there. But if I'm in some rural area in a strip mall, I'm not going to fixate on this place. There's not a lot of room for growth at that point. The other thing too is, if I'm looking for office 2, I'm going to try and make it as easy on myself as possible. I'm going to try not to inject it in the most competitive area, that I can possibly inject it into. So let's say practice 1, my main office is in a very competitive area, but I've done a good job and the practice is doing well. And I look and I go, okay, the average radius of patients coming to my practice is within about 5 miles. So if I start a practice 10 miles away, that should be fine. It's considered a little bit too far to drive. You don't want to share patients between the 2 practices. Terrible idea. Don't buy one that's too close. But 10 miles away would work. But that area is also super competitive. There's like 8 other dentists on the street. I might look a little further afield. We had these clients that were in Nebraska, and there were areas, the real rural areas in Nebraska, where there just weren't any dentists. And it was at the point where the state actually offered these fellas, there were 2 partners, to buy them an office and equip it Like the state was going to pay for it and give it to these guys because one of them was a pilot and they could fly out there. It was kind of a little bit far from their main practice if they would just go work there. So what I would probably do is, there's maps of this that you can find pretty much everywhere. Look for underserved areas that are not far away from you. What does underserved mean? It means there aren't a lot of dentists per person. Because you go to certain markets in the United States where I'm not saying you can't be successful in a competitive market. We have clients who are at the top of many competitive markets. But if I go to a major metropolitan area, some of these are extremely competitive markets. Versus if I go out somewhere in the sticks, there's no other doctors. I might have an easier time of it. And again, could I be successful in the competitive market? Yes. Could I be successful out in the middle of nowhere? Yes. But I'm just trying to make it a little easier on myself, especially since it's office number 2. You see? So I would get a map of underserved areas, look at one that's close to me, maybe within, 2, maybe 3 hours driving distance, maybe a little bit less than 3, 2 would be ideal. And that might be where I start looking for a dental practice. And most states in the U.S. have this. If you look around, get a map like that, you'll find one. And maybe it's an hour and a half away. And there's probably practices available there or a place you could build one. And that might be a good place to open up when you go. Okay. But again, of course, you're going to have to know how to scale when you do all of this stuff. But that's as part of the initial transaction. That's what I'd be looking for. Point number 5. That was number 4. Point number 5, when you buy the next practice or you buy the new practice, this is one of the mistakes we see is you're used to the standards that you have in office number 1, your main office. And let's say your main office is doing, $350,000 a month and you have a cone beam and you have beautiful furniture and your chairs are amazing and everything is perfect and modern. And now you're looking at this office that's an hour and a half away and you're buying it from a doctor who's been practicing for 42 years and they really haven't updated much. So you're going to have to update some of the stuff because you need your equipment to be up to the level where you can maintain a standard of care. That's obvious. And you're going to paint the walls and maybe fix the carpet or whatever. You want it to look nice. But I've seen people get into Office 2 and they go, well, this is nothing like Office 1. I have to make it look exactly like Office 1. And I'm going to go get a cone beam and I'm going to get a this and I'm going to get a that. I probably wouldn't do that. I would make the office actually earn it. Now, stuff that you need in order to maintain standard of care, lights in the operatories and proper hand pieces and burrs. Of course you need those things. But do I need a cone beam? Well, not unless I'm going to be doing a ton of implants there. And right now you just bought the place, you're doing none. If you find that you need to do 2 of those x-rays a week, there's mobile places or places you can send the patient to do it before you go drop money on the cone beam. And I say this because, it's like anything else. Cone beams used to be $9,500, $100,000. They are getting cheaper, which that's cool, right? But I wouldn't go crazy with the technology unless it had to do with maintaining your standard of care or, well, I don't like these chairs. I'm going to buy all new chairs. If they're good serviceable chairs, you can reupholster them for next to nothing. Like I want the place to earn it without dropping standard of care. I'm not going to give substandard care. Okay, that's not cool. But I don't want to drop a bunch of money into a place until it actually shows me that it can produce. Of course, I've put this new associate in. I've put this office manager in who I do have who I've worked with. So I know they're good. But now, the rubber hits the road. They got to start working. So if they start working and the place starts making income, it will actually make enough money to where it can help finance itself buying these things. Because I'd much rather put new cabinets in or reupholster chairs and things like this with the cash flow I'm getting out of the practice than going and taking out more debt. Do you see? I don't have to make it look as beautiful as Office 1. I spent 10 years making Office 1 into what it is. Let's let Office 2 earn it and see if they can turn it into what it should be. All right? But yeah, people get these weird ideas about this and then they end up, heavily in debt without having actually had the place make any money yet. So I would make this place earn it. And to that end, if this is you and you're looking at getting a second or third office, I will give you a download on this episode. We have something called a practice acquisition checklist. It's what we do, or we have a client do when they're looking at a second practice. It's a little form they fill in to kind of figure out the health of the practice and how good of a deal it is. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. And if you want, if this is you and you're looking at a second practice, or even if you're an associate doctor looking at buying your first one, I would use this checklist and you can contact us. We have our, I'll leave our phone number and the website address at the end of the episode, and we'll analyze this checklist for you and tell you, yeah, this is a good deal, or this is how much you should pay, or something along these lines. So yeah, link will be on the episode webpage. So those are the 5 big mistakes that we see. So, here's my advice to you. By all means, if you are into getting additional practices, you want to be an entrepreneurial person, this is the best time to do it. Go for it. I've said this in prior episodes. There's never been a better time economically to be a dentist. There's opportunities like never before. But keep in mind, there's a right and a wrong way. And let's define right and wrong as, it's a better way of saying it. There's a stressful and a much less stressful way of going about doing it. And I would definitely recommend to you that you do it the less stressful way. And if you want more info on this or help, or if you've bought another office and you're kind of or you have your main office isn't doing well, but let's say you've bought a second office and it's not going well, contact us. You can reach us at mgeonline.com, or you can call us at 800-640-1140. Just click the practice consultation link on the episode webpage and we'll set that up for you and help you out. Anyway, that's all I have for you this week, folks. I hope this helps. Again, if you have any questions, contact us at mgeonline.com or 800-640-1140. Have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.